On today's show,
this is a real crisis in our city, and the pandemic made it worse. There are more mentally ill folks living on the street than there were before. I mean, everyone wants a safe neighborhood, and everyone wants to be treated fairly by the criminal justice system, and all New Yorkers deserve that without focusing on fear. I think there are ways to message around accountability. I mean, New Yorkers want accountability, and they want accountability when someone commits a crime. They want accountability if an officer makes abusive or excessive use of force. This is the greatest immigrant city the world has ever known. There's a lot of wealth created here, but we could combat poverty.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Box, the social justice podcast that goes beyond the headlines and typical stories. We like to ask challenging and incisive questions that help us get to a deeper, more nuanced understanding of important issues. I'm your host, Doug Lasden, founder and executive director of the Urban Justice Center. I am thrilled today to have Brad Lander as my guest. As you may know, Brad is a leading candidate to be the next mayor of New York City. As you may also know, Brad is currently one of only 3 citywide elected officials. He is the Comptroller, Jumaane Williams is the public advocate, and Eric Adams is the mayor. And it doesn't look like so far, and maybe we can get Brad's opinion on this, that Jumaane is joining the race. As Comptroller, Brad oversees finances and budgets of the city. I have known him and admired his work since back in the 1990s when he was developing affordable housing in Brooklyn with the Fifth Avenue Committee and then directing the Pratt Center for Community Development. Before going any further, I must tell you that as Executive Director of the Urban Justice Center, I am not permitted by law to endorse any political candidate. Please do not accept anything I say as an endorsement. So, Brad, thanks for coming. I know you're busy. You've got a lot that you're doing, so we appreciate having you.
It's great to be here at the Urban Justice Center. You guys have done such extraordinary social justice work over the years. It's really my honor.
Great. Let's start with, I know it's one of your priorities to get mentally ill homeless people off the streets where it's not good for them, it's not good for the city, it's not good for anybody. It's a lose-lose-lose situation. But I want to know, I haven't actually heard how you're going to do it, so let's start talking about that, especially since my background is originally homeless people on the street.
Yes.
And I have some ideas on it, and I want to see if they're consistent.
That's good. I think they will be. This is a great dialogue. I mean, as you say, this is a real crisis in our city, and the pandemic made it worse. There are more mentally ill folks living on the street than there were before. We estimate as we dug in about 2,000 people, and their cycle between street, subway, hospital, jail, and back again.
At great expense.
Because we keep putting housing last. Hospitals, very expensive. Jail, very expensive. Now, when someone comes out of jail, we're supposed to assess their status for supportive housing. So Department of Corrections assesses it, but then mostly doesn't give them supportive housing, and they wind up back on the street. So we did these big audits. We looked at the homeless sweeps program that the administration operates. In the 6 months we looked at, they forcibly removed 2,308 people from where they were sleeping that night. You want to guess how many got connected to permanent housing?
3?
3.
Oh,
you knew the number.
I did not
3
know. I was
out
just,
of 2,300. And the vast majority, over 90%, just wound up moving somewhere else and sleeping on the street that very night. Then we audited their intensive mobile treatment program, which is supposed to get services to people on the street. But people just keep falling through the cracks because it's hard to stay on your meds while you're on the street or see your clinician while you're on the street. So at the center of our program is something called Housing First that they're using to great effect in Salt Lake City and Houston and Denver. And it says to someone, not will you go into shelter, where people often have had bad experiences, but we have SRO or a supportive housing unit or an apartment for you, and we'll keep your services wrapped around you, and it works 70, 80, 90% of the time. Now,
I would say more than 90% of the time from what I understand.
And, that takes a better coordinated system, more management from City Hall, a more effectively coordinated continuum of care. And of course, if it doesn't work 10% of the time, then you need some other tools for those situations. And that might be having someone go to the hospital. That might be assisted outpatient treatment or a mental health court. But if 80 or 90% of the time housing and services will do it, then that's a city that's safer for everybody who's riding the subway and safer and so much more humane for these individuals too.
That's a great answer, and I appreciate it. But there is one hole there. And it's, to me, the real problem isn't the coordination of it. The problem is the supportive housing
Yes.
itself.
Well,
And back when we had Mayor Dinkins and the first Governor Cuomo, they made a deal and we got 5,000 more units.
Yes.
And so we don't really have the units.
well, we need to build more supportive housing units, but there are today about 2,500 vacant supportive housing units, many of them in old single-room occupancy or SRO buildings that got taken over by nonprofits. And some people don't stay there too long because as soon as they really get stable, they want to move to a slightly bigger apartment. But our research showed there's about 2,000 people who are unsheltered with serious mental illness, and today about 2,500 vacant SRO and supportive housing units. So
I'm glad to hear they're available. I'm sorry to hear they're not being used.
Correct.
Because I can't do the follow-up question is, do we need more of that?
We do.
And would you invest in it?
we do need more supportive housing because, of course, over time you wind up with more people who need it. Don't forget, we have a lot of people in shelter. So, there's still, even leaving aside asylum seekers, about 50,000 New Yorkers
Yes,
in
of
shelter,
course.
many of them single adults for whom supportive housing is critical. So if we put the 2,000 folks who are sleeping unsheltered in those 2,500 units, we're going to need more for people who wind up in shelter. So we absolutely need to build more supportive housing, but we could effectively end street homelessness
For now.
for seriously
Yeah.
mentally ill people.
And it's interesting that for all the social problems, this is one we know how to fix.
It is.
And we know how to fix it cheaper. Supportive housing is certainly cheaper than jails and hospitals and even shelters. I don't know why we haven't been able to get it or effectuate that solution.
I've really been puzzled why Mayor Adams is so committed to this housing last model. They even did a housing first pilot with Volunteers of America, and they did about 100 people. 84% are still in their apartments. We
Yes,
praised that
yes.
program,
Yeah.
and he criticized me for praising the program.
The sweeps gets a lot of attention and makes it look like you're doing something
That's
about
right.
it, but you're really just, to continue the bad metaphor, you're sweeping them somewhere else.
Of
You're
course.
not,
And-
you're not
and
sweeping them
people-
into housing.
If people want
Or-
it to be that if people are forced to the hospital, something better will happen. But even if people go to the hospital and they stay a couple of weeks, they're still going to come out if they go right back to the street.
And the
Of course
hospitals
they'll
won't
be-
keep them more than a couple weeks because that's all they get real payment for.
Correct.
Let me switch gears. Crime. It strikes me that people, regardless of the facts, want their government to get tough on crime. So how do you counter it and giving them the truth about the levels of crime, because it's much lower than people think? It doesn't seem to matter. What is your plan for your campaign to talk to people? And it's a lot of people.
Yeah. I believe it's possible to be serious about safety without focusing on fear. I mean, everyone wants a safe neighborhood and everyone wants to be treated fairly by the criminal justice system, and all New Yorkers deserve that. I mean, focusing on street homelessness is a good example. People are anxious when they get on the subway and see someone who's not well. Maybe they heard the night before on the news that someone got pushed onto the tracks, and they probably know, okay, that person's probably not going to, but how am I sure? You get anxious. But here's a great solution. Let's connect people to housing and services, and then you feel safer. If we can make measurable progress, it'll make a big difference. And there's some other things we can do. We're releasing a plan to deal with retail theft by enabling the drugstores and bodegas to more quickly report to the PD rather than have to kind of call and get caught in the 911s. If we could get the toothpaste out from behind lock and key, people will feel better about the city. So I do
Terrible
think,
thing that you can't buy
there are some
toothpaste.
very practical things we can do. Look, I guess I feel like, especially out of the pandemic, disorder rose up, more mental health, more crime. And I don't think we did enough. I don't think progressives, including myself, did enough to say we've got to be smart and responsive about what we're doing here on focused efforts to prevent gun violence, on retail theft, on mental health and homelessness.
There are people that, no matter what, want tough on crime solutions, and they can't hear, in a sense, the more thoughtful and even the more effective solutions. We're going to put them in jail. We're going to arrest them. We're not going to go soft on the criminals, and we're going to make this city safe. Somehow there is a significant portion of the electorate that hears that and doesn't hear, well, we have to be smart about it. Putting people in jail is not going to make us safer.
Yeah.
And so somehow it's very frustrating to me that people can't hear the more intelligent solutions.
Look,
And you're offering me an intelligent solution. And my question is more about how are you going to deal with that?
yeah. Well, look, I think there are ways to message around accountability. I mean, New Yorkers want accountability, and they want accountability when someone commits a crime. They want accountability if an officer makes abusive or excessive use of force. And they want accountability when politicians either spend billions of dollars on programs that don't work or sell New York City out for a pardon to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
There's a way to think about it as accountability that I think is strong, but isn't playing on fears, isn't provoking images. Look, fear is a very powerful motivator, but I think a well-run city can be a powerful motivator too.
It does happen. And this is sort of a similar question that you don't have to defend your bona fides on being a progressive, thoughtful politician.
Thank you.
But I've been here since Koch and Giuliani and Bloomberg and Adams, and they all won not as progressives. We did have David Dinkins, who was sort of a progressive, and we had de Blasio, who was a really progressive, and they did win. But is it the same answer, thoughtful policies? How will you appeal, putting the criminal justice aside, and that's a big part of it, but it's the whole city.
Yeah.
And how are you going to get to that?
Yeah, the Koch tone is at least worth talking a little more about because that's more of a straight talk. How am I doing? In 1977, when he won, the city really felt disordered even more than it does now.
And he started as a progressive, actually.
And he created the modern affordable housing program that we have at a time when housing abandonment instead of insanely high prices and displacement were the issue.
Towards the end of
with
his,
a lot of pressure from people.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. Not too little, but too late.
Yeah. But look, New Yorkers are compassionate, but they also want straight talk. They don't want to be bullshit. So if you can't persuade them, this is a real solution. This is actually going to work. And I'm giving it to you straight. Housing First is a good example. I said, I think it'll work 70, 80, 90% of the time. Someone's going to say, well, what about the other 10, 20, 30% of the time? That's what I'm anxious about. What are you going to do there? And I can say back both. Let's get housing for those, 80% of folks, and let's have mental health courts as a smarter solution for when it doesn't work. So it's got to be some kind of straight talk. I actually think those
numbers are higher. And the ones who aren't there, at the end of 2 years, often have moved somewhere else. So I would actually dispute that your solution is better than you're giving it credit for.
And I think people want straight talk. If you say, I've got a model, it works most of the time. I'm realistic about those cases where it doesn't. And I hear you, and let's be real about it, as opposed to I'm going to try to sell you something rosy without the reality.
I do think that from the outside, you have been in charge of the budgets and you have been in charge of the finances of the city. That comes with a certain competence. And I think that you may benefit from people saying, he's walking around in a suit and tie and he's competent at this stuff. So let's hear what he has to say.
We manage the $285 billion pension fund that is the retirement security for teachers and cops and firefighters and school crossing guards. It's done very well in my administration. Last year was up 10%. That saved taxpayers $1.8 billion. At the same time, we have the boldest responsible investing program of anyone in the country.
I'm aware of that.
Biggest affordable housing investments had the backs of Starbucks workers and hotel workers, divested fossil fuels. So that's the idea. Like, we can make money and save money for taxpayers and uphold the values that this city depends on.
Michael Dukakis didn't win on competence. But I think competence is an important factor.
Right now, people are desperate for a better run city. Eric Adams has sort of teed that up. People don't want corruption, and they want effective, honest leadership at City Hall.
Yeah, I want to get to Eric Adams. But first, I have two more questions about criminal justice. What of this $500,000 that we're spending for prisoners?
Yeah.
Why per prisoners? I don't know if our listeners don't understand it, but
for 1
New
year
York City
of
is spending
incarceration at Rikers.
$500,000 per prisoner per year.
That's right.
How is that possible, and how is it that Adams can't fix it?
Yeah, well, a big amount of that is the sunk costs of Rikers. We've got this giant facility that was built for 20,000 people, and now we have about 6,000 there, and we're still paying a lot of the costs of the bigger facility. Of course, because it's old and decrepit. Maintenance costs of a much larger facility. Then, yes, there's a ton of repairs needed because it's old and decrepit. We still do have...
But we can shut down half or two-thirds of it.
Well, we want to shut down the whole thing.
No, I know, until we shut down the whole
much
thing.
More
but
efficiently.
yes, of
Part
course.
of the reason why building the borough-based jails makes sense. I mean, closer to the courts, yes. More humane, yes.
Closer to the communities.
Closer to the communities, yes. But also can operate less outrageously expensively because
so it's not just a matter of we have way too many guards.
Also that.
Okay.
It is also that. I mean, as the jail population came down from 20,000 to 6,000, we did not bring significantly down the count of correction officers. And so now we have just a much higher ratio of guards to detainees than we used to have. And that's much more expensive.
We did the same thing with the mentally ill in state psychiatric facilities when we let people out because of the deinstitutionalization and the drugs that will allow people to be in the community. 90% of the budget stayed in the hospitals and 90% of the people left. Yeah. And so I just see the same thing happening. It took many years and Mario Cuomo to end that. I would hope that we could end it sooner.
Well, this is part of why I support receivership for Rikers. I think we need someone who's less bound by procurement policy, who can dig in on staffing and really make change. And the city's Department of Correction hasn't been able to do that for decades.
Somebody has to step in there and pull an Elon Musk and say,
I mean,
I don't
get
rid of those
Musk, but a receiver is that idea, is someone who's not bound by the same bureaucratic shackles.
Well, the unions would use
and
not
the
bound by the
procurement
unions.
rules, both of those things.
But one more question about criminal justice. One of the things that was greatly disappointing to me, really crushingly disappointing, I would say, is the city council passed a law prohibiting solitary confinement. And Mayor Adams used an emergency power, and I think in an illegal way, and I believe it's still in the courts, to put an end to it. Anybody who looks at solitary confinement knows that is torture. When you put somebody in their own cell by themselves, day after day after day, month after month, and sometimes year after year, by yourself with your own thoughts, it's torture. Everyone who has looked at it, it's torture. And it pains me that we as a city are torturing people. And the mayor has made the decision, I don't know why, I think bowing to the unions perhaps, to continuing torture people.
It's appalling. I've been at Rikers a good number of times, and 2 times I was there, I went and visited people in what they call involuntary protective custody. So these aren't even people who've been accused by guards of doing something. These are people where they said, oh, you're in a danger from someone else, so against your will, we're putting you in a tiny little dark cage 23 hours a day, and when they let you out, all they let you out to is a little anteroom right outside, barely, steps
often
away.
With chains.
Still in a cage in the one that it was just like a little cell and then a different little cell, and they called that being out. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't survive there for any length of time. I got to know Khalif Browder's mom a little bit, who committed suicide, took his own life after he had spent a lot of time in Rikers for, allegedly stealing a backpack. Right. So, yes, as mayor,
and it's not necessary. It's not necessary. Let's take some of that. I don't even know if it's more costly, but even if it is, it is below us. Yeah. It is. So I'm
agreed.
That needs to change.
Must end.
Let me ask. I have a closing question I want to ask you, but I want to ask about some of your competition. What of this Mayor Adams going to bend the knee to President Trump, and now we have the mayor of New York toadying up to the president, being his mouthpiece in New York? asking the question kind of answers it, but he is going to be a serious candidate because there are a certain number of Trump supporters, not in the Democratic Party so much.
I mean,
you think he's going to run as a Republican?
Well, let me
Those
just
are
first
three
say,
questions all at once. Sorry.
Well, I mean, what's happening right now is dangerous and unfathomable. I mean, the fact, the Southern District, for all, has always been a place of independent prosecution of corruption.
Yeah.
So to have the Justice Department order them to dismiss the case and order them to dismiss it without prejudice so that Trump could bring it back at any
that's right.
time.
That's right.
So
yes.
Adams will just be like dangling on a string every single day when Trump cuts the budget of our schools or our public housing, when he sends ICE agents. Our mayor, instead of thinking, what do I have to do to protect New Yorkers, will be thinking, what do I have to do to protect myself? And it is galling in every way, both as what it means for a criminal justice system and independent law enforcement, but also New Yorkers don't have a mayor who's got their backs as long as he's in office, owing Trump his legal survival. Now, I do think New Yorkers are done with this. We might not be able to get rid of him through a fair trial, but we can get rid of him at the ballot box. And I don't think Democrats will vote for him. I don't think Republicans will vote for him. I don't think independents will vote for him. Even before he sold us out to Trump, he was failing to deliver on affordable housing or deliver on childcare, just run the city better. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, he may, by moving out, he may open the door a little more to Andrew Cuomo. And I've known Andrew Cuomo since he was doing homeless work back in the 80s, and he's had his own problems, but I don't think they've been of the criminal. I don't think he's been charged, or you can correct me. What of Andrew?
Yes. I mean, I don't think New Yorkers want to replace one corrupt chaos agent with another. He may not have been criminally charged, but let's be fair. There was a lot of corruption Joe Percoco, his senior aide, was found guilty of corruption. He created the Moreland Commission to go after corruption and then eliminated it and shut it down as soon as it started to poke around and come after him. 11 women accused him of sexual harassment, and he resigned in advance of he was going to be impeached, but he resigned first. Now taxpayers are spending $28 million on his legal defense, and they've issued subpoenas for the gynecology and therapy records of his accusers. Like, gross.
That I'm aware was a problem. I don't know that he's been charged with anything.
He was not. I mean, he was not criminally charged. And similarly on the COVID deaths.
And nobody's holding themselves back from charging him.
Agreed. I mean, and on the COVID deaths, there I think people just wanted honest answers. Congress found that he personally marked up the report in order to underreport the number of deaths in nursing homes to protect his $5 million book deal. Though I don't know if that's illegal, but I don't think it's what New Yorkers
I was so
want.
sorry to see that, because he actually, to be fair, he was doing a very good job with the COVID. I think he was doing daily reports. It seems he couldn't let well enough alone.
He was doing good press conferences at a time when people wanted stability. I give that. But the decision to send people with COVID into nursing homes was against CDC guidance. Yeah. It had devastating effect. He could have just said, we didn't know enough at the time. We made a mistake.
That's right. That's what I think probably happened. But instead lied to cover it up. Yeah. And I just think even before all of that, it's his cuts to the subway that led to the summer of hell. Cuts to his Medicaid redesign eliminated, I think, 1,000 inpatient psychiatric beds. Okay. And he was fighting New York City all the time as governor. So I think he's doing this for his own restoration, not for New Yorkers and to solve our problems. And it might be that he's doing it because he it's in him to serve. He doesn't know anything else. Or?
I mean, serve is doing a lot of work in that sentence. I think it's in him to see himself in charge. Other people who wanted to serve might have asked questions and tried to learn some things. Why did I misunderstand what these women were saying to me? Why are the families so angry about, could I learn something better? That would be serving. Well, this seems to me like self-aggrandizing.
It seems to me that those sexual malfeasances, and I don't know what he's been found guilty of, but it seems that the Republican Party forgives them and the Democratic Party doesn't. Is it possible that Andrew will be running as a Republican?
We'll see. He's, I assume
We don't know any of it yet.
We don't know any of it yet. And to me, it's like not so much a question of forgiveness. It's a question of what kind of leadership do New Yorkers want for their city right now. And I think they're going to want a stable, honest, effective leadership. I mean, maybe people think, well, Trump's in Washington, so we need our own Trump. But I don't think
seems hard to believe.
What New Yorkers want. I think they want, give me someone who will run City Hall well, who's honest, who's not corrupt, who's effective, who's got a proven track record, and more or less matches the values of New Yorkers.
I think we're all going to be appreciating some stability.
Amen.
Just quickly, 2 quick questions. Do you have any idea of what Jumaane is planning?
Jumaane tells me that he is planning to run for re-election as public advocate.
Great.
That's what he's been raising money for. He had said if Eric Adams resigned and he became the mayor, he might think differently about it. But that does not seem to be happening. Yes. So he's gearing up to run for re-election as public advocate. He's obviously been a great public advocate and a partner since our days of passing the Community Safety Act to end discriminatory stop and frisk, a long time friend.
I know you guys get along well, and I saw that he kicked off your campaign. Yeah. And so we'll have to see where he places his endorsement.
He's committed to rank me first or second, so I got to get him all the way to first.
Who is potentially the other first?
Well, he didn't say yet, which is good for me, so I'm calling that supporting me.
You are probably working full days.
And then some.
And then some. Are you having fun?
It's an amazing city. I was out in Queens at this event of Sikhs honoring a martyr they had. And that led me to learn about this time when the Sikh Empire saved thousands of Jews who were walking 1,000 miles from where they had been exiled in Persia. It's an incredible city. I was on the, at the hub in the Bronx. The idea of helping it solve these problems. I mean, the thought that we could have a city that doesn't have mentally ill folks sleeping on the street and then have like a little more strut in our step. This is the greatest immigrant city the world has ever known. There's a lot of wealth created here, but we can combat poverty. I love New Yorkers, and I love the idea of making this city run better.
Well, Brad Lander, thank you so much for taking time out and coming by. It's a thrill to have you, and I can't endorse you, but I can wish you good luck.
Thank you, Doug. It's great being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
If you're enjoying our podcast series, please share it with a friend. Leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and follow us on your favorite podcast app to get every episode. Thanks.